When my only son looked me in the eye last December and said, "Dad, I wasn't expecting you for Christmas," I felt something inside me break. His words were calm, almost casual, as if I was some distant relative who had overstayed his welcome, not the man who had raised him, supported him, and made sure he never went without a roof over his head. I didn't yell. I didn't argue. Instead, I quietly smiled, walked out of his house, and the very next morning, I canceled the mortgage payment he depended on. My name is Robert Mitchell. I'm 62 years old, a retired high school history teacher, and I live in a small town just outside Columbus, Ohio. For most of my life, I believed that being a good father meant sacrifice. I worked extra hours, skipped vacations, and poured every ounce of energy into making sure my son, Daniel, had a life far better than mine. I thought we were close. I thought we shared a bond that nothing could ever shake. But as I stood there, listening to him tell me that my presence wasn't expected at Christmas, I realized how wrong I was. Christmas had always been a sacred holiday for me. After my wife passed away 10 years ago, it became the one time of year when family meant everything. Decorating the tree together, baking cookies in the kitchen, watching old movies in the living room, these weren't just traditions. They were pieces of my healing. Daniel knew that. He knew how much it mattered. And yet, that night, his words cut through me sharper than any blade. I remember walking out into the cold December air, the snow crunching beneath my shoes, the house glowing with warm lights behind me. It should have been a picture-perfect holiday scene, but instead it felt hollow. My son and his wife were inside, laughing, planning their party, while I stood outside like a stranger, like a man who didn't belong in his own family. That was the moment I knew things would never be the same again. I had spent years carrying Daniel on my shoulders, not just emotionally but financially. The house he lived in? It was mine, at least on paper. I had paid the down payment, signed the mortgage, and continued to cover the monthly costs because I wanted him to have stability. I wanted him to focus on building a life, a career, a family. I thought my generosity was an investment in his future. But now I could see, to him, it was nothing more than entitlement. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to beg for a seat at the table anymore. I wasn't going to chase after scraps of affection from a son who had clearly forgotten the meaning of family. No, this time, I was going to let him learn what it felt like when the ground beneath his feet was suddenly pulled away. And as I drove home that night, my hands gripping the steering wheel, one thought echoed in my mind. He said he wasn't expecting me for Christmas, but he'll never forget the gift I'm about to give him. When Daniel was a little boy, I used to carry him on my shoulders through the local park every Sunday afternoon. He would stretch his arms out like an airplane, laughing so hard that people walking by couldn't help but smile at us. Back then, it felt like we were a team, just me and my son against the world. I remember telling myself, as long as he's happy, I'll be okay. And for years, that was enough. Life wasn't always easy. Teaching high school history never made me a rich man, but it gave me stability, and it gave Daniel the chance to grow up in a home that was safe. I cut back on luxuries so that he could go to soccer camp, buy the latest textbooks, and join his friends on school trips. When his mother passed away, I became both mom and dad overnight. It was hard, yes, but I poured myself into making sure Daniel never felt the crushing weight of that loss as deeply as I did. I remember those evenings in the small kitchen of our old house, just the two of us. I'd be stirring a pot of spaghetti, and he'd be sitting at the counter, telling me about the kids in his class, his teachers, his dreams. He used to say he wanted to be an architect. "I'll build you a mansion one day, Dad," he'd laugh. And I would smile, knowing that no mansion could ever mean more to me than that little boy's happiness. Years went by, and I watched him grow into a young man. College applications, late-night study sessions, graduation. I was there for every milestone. I worked extra shifts at the school library just to make sure his tuition was paid. When he got accepted into university, I felt proud in a way I can't even describe. It was like all the years of sacrifice finally meant something. After graduation, Daniel met Lisa, his future wife. She was charming, confident, and ambitious. At first, I was happy for him. He had found someone to share his life with, someone who seemed to support him. I remember their engagement dinner at a little Italian restaurant downtown. I raised my glass and said, "To new beginnings, and to a son who's always made me proud." Daniel smiled that night in a way I hadn't seen in years, and my heart swelled with hope. But slowly, things started to change. It was little things at first. Phone calls that went unanswered. Texts that took days to get a reply. Holidays that used to be just the two of us now became crowded with Lisa's family, where I often felt like an afterthought. I'd sit in the corner while everyone else exchanged gifts, my presence acknowledged politely but never warmly. Still, I told myself it was normal. After all, marriage changes things. People grow, families expand. I wanted to believe that my role in Daniel's life was simply shifting, not disappearing. I kept reminding myself, "He's busy. He's building a career. He'll come around." When Daniel and Lisa started looking for a house, that was when I stepped in again. Housing prices were high, and they didn't have the savings for a down payment. Without hesitation, I dipped into my retirement fund. I told him, "Don't worry about it, son. I'll help you get started. You just focus on your future." He hugged me that day, and for a moment, I felt like the old Daniel was back, the little boy who used to sit at the counter and talk about his dreams. But the hug didn't last long, and neither did the gratitude. As months passed, I noticed a subtle shift. The calls for help became more frequent, but the calls just to talk disappeared. Every time my phone rang, I already knew what it was about: money for a repair, help with a bill, questions about mortgage payments. It was as if my entire relationship with my son had been reduced to a line item in his budget. And yet, I kept paying. I kept telling myself that's what parents do. They give, even when it hurts. I thought if I just kept supporting him, he would eventually realize how much I loved him, how much I had sacrificed. But looking back now, I see how blind I was. The truth is, the red flags were there all along. I just didn't want to see them. One Christmas, 2 years before that fateful night, I noticed Daniel's gift to me was a scarf. It was still wrapped in the store's paper bag, the receipt tucked inside. It wasn't the gift itself that hurt, it was the lack of thought. He hadn't even written my name on the tag. Meanwhile, I had spent weeks saving up to buy him the watch he'd been eyeing. I brushed it off. I told myself he was busy, stressed, distracted. But deep down, a small voice inside me whispered, "You're slipping away from him." By the time last Christmas came around, that whisper had become a roar. And when he finally said those words, "Dad, I wasn't expecting you for Christmas," I realized that the life I thought I had, the bond one thought was unbreakable, had already been fractured long before. After that Christmas, something inside me shifted. I didn't say anything to Daniel. I didn't confront him or demand answers. Instead, I started watching silently. Sometimes, silence is more powerful than words, and in that silence, I began to see everything more clearly. The first thing I noticed was how selective Daniel had become with his calls. He no longer picked up when I phoned during the evenings. If I left a voicemail, I'd hear back days later, usually with a rushed tone, like he was checking a box rather than speaking to his father. Yet, if the mortgage was due or a car repair popped up, suddenly my phone would light up with his name. His voice would soften, almost rehearsed, and for a moment, I would feel useful again. But the moment the money issue was solved, so was the conversation. I remember one evening in March. I had been sitting by the window, watching the snow melt from the roof, when my phone buzzed. Daniel's name lit up, and for a split second, I smiled. But when I answered, his first words weren't, "Hi, Dad, how are you?" No, his first words were, "Hey, Dad, do you think you can cover the utility bill this month? Lisa and I are tight on cash." I agreed, as always. But after I hung up, I sat there in silence, staring at the check in my hand. That was when it hit me. My son no longer saw me as a father. He saw me as a safety net. Then there were the family gatherings, or rather, the lack of them. Easter came and went without an invitation. My birthday passed with only a brief text message. "Happy birthday, Dad. Hope it's a good one." No call, no visit, just a string of words on a glowing screen. But the clearest sign came one night in June. I had been lying in bed when my phone lit up at 2:07 a.m. It wasn't a call, it was a bank notification. A withdrawal? Daniel had accessed the joint account we had set up years ago, back when he was in college, and he had taken out money without even mentioning it to me. I stared at the screen in the dark, the glow burning into my eyes. My chest felt heavy, not because of the money. I would have given him anything, but because he didn't think I deserved to know. That was when I realized the trust one thought we shared had turned into quiet exploitation. The next morning, I called him, trying to keep my voice calm. "Son, I noticed you used the account last night. Everything okay?" There was a pause on the other end, followed by a casual, almost dismissive reply. "Yeah, Dad. We just needed it. Don't worry about it." Don't worry about it. Those words echoed in my head all day. To him, I was just a resource. A tap he could turn on and off whenever he wanted. Over the summer, the distance only grew. Lisa's family threw barbecues, posted pictures online, smiling together under the sun. I scrolled through those photos alone in my kitchen, wondering when my son had stopped thinking of me as family. My invitations never came. My calls grew shorter. The laughter we once shared became silence. And yet, I stayed quiet. I played the role of the silent observer, storing every slight, every forgotten call, every cold shoulder deep inside. Because the truth was, I wasn't ready to face it. I wasn't ready to admit that my son, the boy who once promised to build me a mansion, had already started building walls between us instead. But silence can only last so long. By the time autumn arrived, the tension was like a storm cloud hanging over me. Every small interaction was heavy with unspoken words. I could sense that Daniel avoided me not out of busyness, but out of discomfort, as though he knew deep down that he was taking advantage of me, but didn't want to face it. Then came Thanksgiving. I showed up with a pumpkin pie, the way I had for years. When Lisa opened the door, her smile was thin, her words polite but strained. "Oh, hi, Robert. We weren't sure you'd come." Inside, the table was already full. Places set, chairs pulled up. There was no seat for me. They had to grab a folding chair from the garage and squeeze me into a corner. I sat there all evening, trying to be part of the conversation, but mostly listening to stories I wasn't included in. The food tasted like cardboard. The laughter felt like knives. That night, when I drove home alone, I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. My son was slipping further away, and I was powerless to stop it. Or so I thought. Because in that silence, a seed of resolve was already taking root. I didn't know it yet, but the storm was about to break. And when it did, Daniel would finally understand that the man he thought was just a checkbook had a lot more power than he ever realized. The breaking point came sooner than I expected. It was early December, just a couple of weeks before Christmas. Daniel had called me, asking if I could stop by their house. His voice was brisk, almost impatient, But I told myself maybe he wanted to spend time with me. Maybe things were finally turning around. When I arrived, the house was glowing with decorations. Strings of lights ran along the roof, a wreath hung proudly on the front door, and through the window, I could see a tall Christmas tree, sparkling with ornaments. For a moment, standing on the porch, I felt hope. Maybe this would be the year we celebrated together again. Lisa opened the door, smiling politely, but her eyes quickly darted past me. Inside, I saw her family gathered around the table, laughter filling the room. I didn't recognize half the faces, but they looked comfortable, like they belonged. Daniel came over, shaking my hand as though I were some business associate rather than his father. He gestured toward the dining room and said casually, "Dad, I wasn't expecting you for Christmas this year. We've already made plans with Lisa's family. Maybe next time." Just like that. No hesitation. No apology. For a few seconds, the words didn't even register. My heart pounded in my chest, my ears buzzing like static. I stood there, holding a small wrapped gift I had brought, a photo frame with a picture of Daniel as a boy on my shoulders, taken on one of our Sunday park trips. It suddenly felt like a relic from another life, a reminder of a bond that no longer existed. The room behind him was alive with laughter and clinking glasses, but to me, it felt silent. Completely silent. I swallowed hard, forcing a smile, and said, "I see. Well, thanks for letting me know." I placed the gift on the small table near the door and walked out into the cold December night. As the door closed behind me, I felt something inside me harden. That was it. That was the moment I knew my son had chosen a life where I wasn't welcome, where I was nothing more than a burden, an afterthought. Driving home, the roads were lined with Christmas lights, glowing red, green, and gold. Families were out shopping, children holding their parents' hands, their faces lit with joy. But inside my car, there was no joy. Only silence, and a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I didn't cry that night. Not a single tear. The pain was too sharp, too raw, to be softened by something as gentle as crying. Instead, I felt a cold, quiet determination rising in my chest. For so long, I had given and given, waiting for recognition, waiting for love to be returned. But now I understood. Love that must be purchased with money isn't love at all. It's dependency. And dependency can be broken. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there in the dark, my hands gripping the steering wheel. The house felt emptier than usual, but I wasn't afraid of the emptiness anymore. In fact, I welcomed it. Because for the first time, I wasn't going to fill the silence with excuses or false hope. That night, one single thought crystallized in my mind. If my presence isn't welcome in his home, then neither will my money be. It was a turning point, the kind you don't come back from. I wasn't just a disappointed father anymore. I was a man with a plan. And Daniel was about to learn the harshest lesson of his life. The morning after that night, I woke up with a sense of clarity I hadn't felt in years. For so long, I had been drifting, living in denial, convincing myself that Daniel's neglect was just a phase, that one day he would come back around. But after hearing those words, "I wasn't expecting you for Christmas," I finally understood. He didn't see me as family anymore. He saw me as a crutch. And crutches can be taken away. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, and opened the thick folder of mortgage documents I had kept neatly filed away. Every page was a reminder that Daniel's house, his so-called independence, wasn't his at all. It was mine. My money. My signature. My sacrifice. Without me, that house would crumble faster than the lights on his Christmas tree. I flipped through the documents slowly, deliberately, making notes in the margins. I called my bank, confirmed the terms, checked the balances. Everything was still under my control. All it would take was a single phone call, a single decision, and the foundation of Daniel's perfect little life would collapse. But I didn't rush. No, revenge done right is never rushed. It's calculated. It's silent. Over the next few days, I began preparing. First, I visited the bank in person, sitting across from a mortgage officer I'd known for years. I explained that I was considering closing out my obligations on the property. The officer raised an eyebrow, surprised, but nodded politely. He walked me through the process, step by step. By the time I left his office, I knew exactly what I needed to do, and how devastating the fallout would be. Then I called my lawyer. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. I asked about my legal rights, about what would happen if I withdrew from the agreement. His response was simple. "Robert, you're under no obligation to continue paying. The responsibility would fall entirely on your son." That sentence replayed in my head like a melody. The responsibility would fall entirely on your son. Meanwhile, Daniel and Lisa carried on as if nothing was wrong. They hosted dinners, went shopping, posted pictures online of their perfect life. I watched from a distance, scrolling through their smiling photos while I sat alone in my quiet house. And with every post, every staged smile, my resolve grew stronger. One night, out of habit, I checked the joint account again. There it was, another withdrawal, unmentioned, unauthorized. This time, it was for luxury furniture. A leather sofa, a glass dining table, things they clearly didn't need but wanted anyway. Not once did Daniel call to say thank you. Not once did he even acknowledge that it was my money making all of it possible. That was when I decided to collect proof, not because I needed it legally, but because I wanted to remember. I printed the bank statements, highlighting every withdrawal Daniel had made without asking. I kept a folder of receipts, transfers, checks I had written on his behalf. It wasn't just paperwork, it was a record of every piece of myself I had given away without being respected. While I gathered the evidence, I kept my face calm. When Daniel called a week later asking if I could cover one last repair on the house, I agreed. My voice was steady, almost cheerful. "Of course, son. Don't worry about it." Inside, though, I was already counting down the days until everything would come crashing down. I started imagining the moment, the look on his face when the letters arrived, when the bank called, when he realized that the man he had dismissed, the man he had told wasn't welcome for Christmas, was the very man holding the strings of his entire life. And the best part? He had no idea. Lisa once called me after that, asking if I would help fund their upcoming holiday party. I said yes, politely, and even offered to bring a dessert. She laughed lightly, thanked me, and hung up. She didn't know that while she was hanging garlands and preparing her guest list, I was quietly unraveling the safety net beneath them. There's a certain power in silence, watching people build their illusions higher and higher, knowing you're the only one who understands how fragile the foundation really is. I kept my silence, wearing it like armor. By mid-December, everything was ready. The paperwork was filed, the payments canceled, the bank notified. All I had to do was wait. And as I sat in my living room one evening, staring at the twinkling lights on my small, modest Christmas tree, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not sadness, not anger, but control. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't the forgotten father, the unwanted guest. I was the man holding the match. Daniel thought I would never fight back. He thought my love was endless, my wallet bottomless. But he had forgotten something crucial. I may have been retired. I may have been older. But I wasn't weak. I had spent my whole life teaching history, and if there's one lesson history always proves, it's this: when arrogance blinds you, the fall is inevitable. And my son was about to fall harder than he ever imagined. Christmas Eve arrived with all its glittering lights and cheerful noise. Daniel's house was the brightest on the street, lights wrapped around the pillars, candles glowing in the windows, music spilling out into the night. Cars lined the driveway, guests carrying bottles of wine and trays of food. From the outside, it looked perfect, like a postcard of the American dream. But beneath all that shine was a secret waiting to explode. I hadn't been invited, of course. I wasn't expected. But I didn't need to be there to play my part. My revenge had already been set in motion weeks earlier. That night, while Daniel poured champagne for his guests, the first bank notice was being delivered to his mailbox. I imagined the scene, laughter echoing through the house, glasses clinking, when suddenly Lisa's cousin or neighbor picks up an envelope, handing it to Daniel. He tears it open casually, expecting another holiday card. Instead, his smile falters. The words on the page are sharp, undeniable. Notice of default. Payment delinquent. Immediate action required. By the time the second letter arrived, certified mail from the mortgage lender, his face must have drained of all color. That's when the realization would hit him. The safety net was gone. The bills were his, the responsibility his, the consequences his. I wasn't there, but I could picture it perfectly. Lisa demanding answers, guests whispering, Daniel fumbling for excuses. The music no longer sounding festive, the air turning heavy. Later that night, my phone rang. Daniel's number flashed across the screen. For the first time in months, I let it ring out. Then again. And again. Finally, I answered on the fourth attempt. His voice was panicked, frantic. Dad, something's wrong with the bank. They said the mortgage payment wasn't made. Did you forget? Can you fix it? I let the silence hang for a moment, savoring it. Then I said calmly, No, son. I didn't forget. I canceled it. There was a pause on the line, a stunned silence, so thick I could almost hear his world collapsing. What do you mean? He stammered. I spoke slowly, clearly, so there would be no misunderstanding. You told me I wasn't expected for Christmas. You made it clear there was no place for me in your life. So I've decided there's no place for my money in it either. On the other end, Daniel's voice cracked, desperate now. Dad, please, you can't do this. We'll lose the house. Lisa's family is here, everyone's. I cut him off. Then maybe it's time they all learn the truth. That the home you brag about, the life you parade in front of them, was never yours. It was mine. And I'm done paying for someone who treats me like I don't exist. The line went silent. I didn't wait for a response. I simply ended the call. That night, I sat in my small living room, the soft glow of my modest tree lighting the walls. Alone, yes. But for the first time in years, I didn't feel empty. I felt free. Over the next week, the fallout unfolded exactly as I knew it would. The bank followed through. Notices piled up. Without my payments, Daniel and Lisa were scrambling, panicked. Word spread quickly through their circle of friends and family. The whispers started, about how Daniel's father had been the one paying all along, about how he had treated me, about how the house they flaunted was never really theirs. Humiliation is a quiet, heavy thing. It doesn't explode like fireworks. It seeps into every corner, poisoning reputations, turning friends into skeptics. And Daniel felt every ounce of it. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to show up at his door. The truth spoke for itself. For years, he thought he was untouchable, that my love was unconditional, that my wallet was infinite. But on that Christmas Eve, in front of everyone he had chosen over me, he learned the one lesson he'd spent his whole life avoiding. Every action has a consequence. And this time, the consequence was losing everything. It's been over a year since that Christmas. The lights from Daniel's perfect house are long gone. The family that once gathered there now avoids the subject altogether. And the home itself? Sold. Foreclosed. Nothing more than another number in the bank's endless system. Daniel and Lisa moved into a modest rental across town. The irony isn't lost on me. He once looked down on me for living in a small, quiet place, and now that's all he has. Except as comes with the bitter taste of knowing what he lost, and why. As for me, my life changed in ways I didn't expect. At first, I worried I would feel guilty, that the weight of my decision would haunt me. But instead, I felt lighter. Free of obligation, free of manipulation, free of the endless cycle where love was measured in dollars instead of respect. I started spending more time on myself. I fixed up the old cabin out by the lake, something I had been putting off for years. I joined a local veterans group, men and women who understood what it meant to fight battles both overseas and at home. And slowly, I began to rebuild a life that wasn't centered around being useful only when someone needed my money. The holidays are quieter now. My Christmas tree is smaller, the dinner simpler. But there is a peace in that simplicity, a warmth that no grand house or expensive decoration could ever provide. Sometimes, I still think about Daniel. He doesn't call anymore. Maybe one day he will, maybe he won't. That's his choice. But I've made mine. And my choice was to stop enabling disrespect, to stop financing ingratitude, and to finally put value on myself instead of someone else's comfort. People often ask me if I regret it, if I wish I had handled things differently. My answer is always the same: no. Because in the end, revenge wasn't about destroying him, it was about reclaiming me. He took my presence for granted. He treated me like an afterthought. But when I canceled that mortgage payment, I canceled something far deeper, the belief that I was only worth what I could provide. And that's the lesson I carry forward. She took everything, except my soul. And from that, I rebuilt my life, not for her, not for him, not for revenge, but for me.